you, Tawfiq, and IDC team for all that you do and for organizing this very important call. I'll preface what I'm about to say by stating the obvious. I'm not Lebanese. I am, however, an American Christian who loves Lebanon and is deeply concerned and who's worked on this issue for a number of years with IDC and, to be frank, is feeling quite frustrated and helpless. The situation in Lebanon, I think most of you on the call know this, but I'll say it anyway, it bears repeating, has reached the catastrophic level. This is not just a matter of Christian persecution or a humanitarian cause that can be solved with a little bit more aid money. This is a catastrophic situation, and Lebanon is reaching a place of being a failed state. We're talking about total political stalemate and corruption, Iranian domination, which has been mentioned already, massive refugee problem from Syria, economic failure, COVID, we could go on. And I've come to believe in the time that I've been working on this issue that only very dramatic action from both inside and outside the country will save it. And I'm probably more aggressive these days than maybe some on the call, but I think it's important to push, which is why I was so happy when this event was organized, because the framing is correct. The idea of a new policy, of a fresh start, of a new way of thinking, a new approach on Lebanon from the US. That's exactly where we are right now. Help on the margins just won't do. And I think some of the things, the pieces of this policy have been mentioned. Some of it is already underway. We've talked about pressuring Hezbollah, addressing the problem of corruption. All of that needs to be part of it. But I would go one step further and say that this new policy, whatever it is, needs to address what I'm calling Lebanon's systemic flaw. And the solution needs to include some kind of political reorganization for the country. And I don't know that people are talking about that enough. And this problem, this systemic flaw, precedes the Hezbollah problem. Hezbollah is a massive problem. Iran is a massive problem. But Hezbollah is only doing the same thing that the PLO did in the 1960s and 70s, right? Which is exploiting a crack in the system. And even after we push down Hezbollah, if we don't address the flaw, someone else, some other organization will rise in the next 10 years. And, I think part of the problem here, certainly from an American perspective, is that we often talk about Lebanon as being more than a country, being a message, right? A message of religious coexistence. And it has been that. And it's certainly much better on that front than most other countries in the region. But I think several decades after the Civil War, we can all admit that that message, though noble, has more or less failed. Religious coexistence is not working in Lebanon. This is the country, I wrote something on Twitter yesterday saying that the only enduring constitutional principle of Lebanon right now seems to be total political deadlock, right? Nothing is happening because the government is so bogged down in these sectarian differences. And for me, it seems that the old Lebanon, and it's hard to say this, but the old Lebanon of the 50s and 60s is dead. There's something new that needs to come in its place. And for me, I know I'm not the first person to talk about these things, but the answer seems to be obvious, right? It's whether you're talking about dotted lines or solid lines, federalism, decentralization, partition, there's a whole bunch of ideas in this front, but something big needs to be done. And I think we need to be integrating that big thing into this conversation. And I think the US can play a huge role here if it understands the scope of the problem. I think France, maybe even Russia can play a role, but we can't impose it. There needs to be this partnership with people inside the country. And thankfully, those people exist. And some of those people are even on the call right now. But there's this sort of dilemma that we face, that people inside the country are facing a very real life or death situation when it comes to standing up and leading, right? We saw what happened with Lokman Slim just in the past few weeks. And it's important for us on the outside, even as we're pushing toward this idea that the patriarch mentioned, an international conference, absolutely, I think the direction that we need to go. We also need to be keeping up the pressure on Iran, on Hezbollah, keeping them on the ropes so that we can provide cover for political dissidents, right? Political figures, new leaders who understand the need for a new model. And I think the sooner we see all of this, and now again, I'm talking as an American, the better. People inside the country, I think, already sense that, you know, the scope of the issue. But I think as we're thinking about a new policy, we need to be thinking much bigger. This is not something that we can throw money at and hope goes away. This is a massive thing. And if Lebanon fails, it may be a small state, but it's where all the triangles in the Near East touch.
All right, Rob.
Different issues. And I think that we need to be aware of that and realize that success here is going to have, you know, positive implications everywhere else.